The topic of my presentation is resilience thinking for integrating disaster risk reduction and climate action in heritage management. And as was kindly mentioned by Tamara, I am project manager in urban heritage, climate change, and disaster risk management at ICCROM in Rome. So my starting point for my presentation is really about the way we have started to relook at heritage from previously only looking at it in terms of monuments and archaeological sites and thinking of protecting immediate surroundings and the monument or the site and with no relationship to the surrounding context. This has been kind of predominant way of approaching heritage for many, many years. The considerations have been that we only value what is most significant, what is monumental, visual aesthetics or symbolism are the main criteria, and protection is done mainly by exclusion through boundaries and buffer. And the only intervention we think of in terms of conservation is more in terms of really preserving the physical fabric. Also, past is separated from the present, and so we make a distinction between what is past and what comes from the past and what is going to be the present and the future. So only we want to preserve what is coming from the past. And development is also seen purely as anti-conservation, and that's the kind of predominant kind of thinking that if we do development, it is anti-conservation, and if we do conservation, it is supposed to be anti-development. So, however, the notion of past has really changed with respect to built heritage, and past, present, and future are really seen to be understood now as a continuum. We want to really look at them not just as separated a long time, but see them more in terms of what continues from past to present and how do we want to take it to the future. Within this kind of predominant thinking, resilience perspective or the concept of resilience comes in. And in fact, Stockholm Resilience Center has really brought out this concept as the capacity of a system, be it an individual or forest or city or an economy, to deal with change and continue to develop. So as I said, continuity is really the key in this, and how do we keep that continuity is the predominant consideration for us. And that means that change is the only constant that we deal with, and no longer we think of only preserving what comes from the past. So there are three main dimensions of resilience that come out very clearly when we deal with heritage. So one, of course, is persistence as to what we want to keep, transformability, or how do we want to transform things in the future, and how do we adapt to what is already changing. So these are the three predominant kind of aspects of resilience that we deal with. So when we think of this, change in heritage place has to be considered in relation to its significance. Persistence, adaptability, and transferability have to be considered simultaneously. It's not either or, but we have to kind of make a decision on what level of persistence or adaptability or transferability we need to look at. And we need to look at both the slow and the fast variables. So if we think about major hazards like earthquakes or floods or fires, we cannot avoid looking at slow or cumulative processes because they are all interconnected with each other. And very importantly, the specific resilience, whether it is regards to earthquake, whether it is with regards to flood or any other kind of specific hazard, has to be connected with a larger overall resilience approach. And that resilience approach, so we cannot have just earthquake-centered thinking or flood or specific hazard-centered thinking. It also means that we need to encourage learning, experimentation, and innovation. So it's not purely about preserving what is physical fabric, but we are actually looking at really thinking of innovative ideas that will help us to really adapt or transform for the future. and then broaden the participation of stakeholders and right holders to build resilience of heritage places. It definitely goes beyond just heritage professionals or the managers of heritage, but it takes into account stakeholders. And when I say right holders, also community members are equally as much at stake. Now, what is happening, why this concept of change or resilience becomes a huge challenge, is the very much debated and discussed concept of climate change, which is really a challenge for us now when we are facing increased climate temperature, high temperatures. We are having much higher average precipitation in many regions of the world, and many cities are showing that the microclimate has really gone up to a very extreme level. And coupled with that, of course, we have the carbon emissions, and we also face the whole challenge of the much more carbon dioxide is in the atmosphere, and its higher emission is going to create a further depletion of ozone layer, and the results will be catastrophic. And now we can clearly see that if we continue this for in 2050, we will be really facing huge challenges. And I'm not going to speak about them, but for example, sea levels will rise 1.6 feet, and maybe by 2100 they will rise by 50 feet, 10 feet in some places, which means it's going to be having a huge implications on human lives, but also will have impact on heritage, which I'm going to talk about now. And obviously, there will be a big displacement, and the relationship between climate change and conflicts is also something that we cannot avoid. With the depletion of resources like water, people will be forced to move to different locations. There would be more instances of wars or occupations. And so we will be really under immense challenge. So for cultural heritage, it implies what we already see, that maybe huge incidents of bushfires affecting heritage sites like Parthenon, or in the US, where this important archaeological site is already facing a sea level rise, and a meter of sea level rise in 50 years will put the whole site underwater. And then such many similar coastal sites will be extremely vulnerable to sea level rise. Weathering was always there, but the frequency or the rate of weathering has also increased tremendously. And of course, there are also going to be many more extreme climate related disasters, be it flood or drought or storms. And definitely, as you have seen in the Eastern Europe as well, in Croatia and Serbia in 2014, there were such huge floods which kind of inundated many historic towns and created big damage to many cultural heritage sites. And as in New York, where Hurricane Sandy in 2012 created big damage to especially to the historic quarter. And in fact, the fire that followed this hurricane damaged many wooden houses. And then we also have to keep into mind the challenge of adapting traditional technology and materials to fast changing climatic pattern. So areas where there was no, which were like cold deserts with hardly any rainfall, suddenly face cloudbursts, and adobe constructions are no longer able to really survive. So this also requires us to rethink about traditional materials and technology. And coupled with that, we have many sites which are facing intense urbanization. And so on one hand, you have huge changes in the climatic pattern. On the other hand, the number of people living in cities is really increasing, and that's going to create a lot of problem as well. So we need to really think about these situations as well, very much, and then which also means that there would be unregulated sprawl resulting in loss of landscapes and farmland. And there is also issue of sustainability in such cases, because the farmlands will really grow, and there could be issue of not having adequate development planning. And because of that, there is more issue of loss of ecology, because of which many of the heritage sites will face challenges of flooding and so on and so forth. And in many cases, like I just showed you this example from historic area in Bangalore in India, where a very important heritage site is not functioning because the whole ecology of that place has been damaged. So we need to really look at climate change, urbanization, and we also need to connect them to all the other challenges that we are facing today, such as the pandemic we are facing is also all connected to how our habitat has changed, how the ecology has changed, and that's creating these issues. So, so this is where I would like to also mention that it is important when we look at heritage sites to see all these things coming together, whether they are sea level rise, cyclones, or flooding, or fires. Take, for example, this situation where in India, where a couple of years ago there were flash floods in during summer time, and because of high temperature, there was not only heavy rainfall, but also the climate change resulted in the melting of the glacier, which carried with it a lot of silt, and that resulted in huge damage. Also because the development that had happened in the floodplains didn't allow water to really go away. And also coupled with that, it brought with it a lot of silt because of the melting glacier, but also because of the development that had happened around and the cutting of trees, deforestation. There was a cumulative damage, and many heritage structures were damaged. Here you can see that climate change is exacerbating complex crises, and it is really linked with our territorial development. So no longer we can look at heritage in isolation. We have to think about heritage in the larger territorial context. And we need to also understand that a lot of our heritage actually evolved by having a clear understanding on how to live with the environment. And this kind of broken relationship, which in fact led to the development of heritage itself, has created all these challenges. And I'm not going to get into this example, but there's a lot to be learned from heritage in terms of linking people, their environment, and their habitat for a sustainable living. And so we need to really have a territorial perspective for heritage protection, where we look at cities, peri-urban areas, rural areas, and the interlinkages between them, the ecological relationships between them, and that need to be maintained in order to really address these challenges. And that requires us new approaches, tools, methodologies, and learnings from traditional knowledge systems. So this brings me to the approach that ICCROM we have been now advocating and working on, which is place-based approach for heritage management, which looks beyond heritage site and tries to look at the larger context and its relationship with the site. And for managing heritage, we need to draw these connections, which probably we have not been doing for a long time. So this kind of approach shifts from looking only at the site to looking at the larger place itself, and drawing the connections between the built fabric, the people, and the environment, and connecting nature and culture. So this redefines the objectives of heritage management in terms of holistic protection of the tangible and intangible values, and providing ecosystem services, socioeconomic and public health benefits to people without compromising the values, and then linking to the larger context of the place. So this is what we need to really think about, work on, is to link these values of the site with the wider context, look at the territorial planning aspects, also connect to the risks that occur to heritage site due to developments in the wider context, and very importantly, work across multiple jurisdictions and geographic boundaries. It's no longer enough for us to draw a line and say, this is our property and we work with it. We need to work with jurisdictions that are probably going beyond that heritage site, and we need to kind of work with that, which also requires us to think of heritage management with risk lens in these times of uncertainty, with a focus on mitigation, preparedness, adaptation, having a multi-hazard approach, and following the approach of building back better to reduce vulnerabilities. So these become very, very critical for us to follow as we move forward. Now, lens of resilience has to be also reconsidered, not by bouncing backwards, as if any disaster happens, we want to go back to how it was before, but bouncing forwards. And that's a kind of relook at perspective which goes from past to present and to the future. And so future is very much a part of our heritage management discourse and is not just limited to the past. This brings us to to do more efforts to connect climate change adaptation, disaster risk reduction with heritage conservation and sustainable development. For a long time, these have all evolved in their own ministries and their own departments with their own policies and guidelines. But in order to make a real change and address these complex issues, there requires to be a much more connection between these different domains. And ICCROM IUCN World Heritage Leadership Program is exactly with various programs. And one of the aspects is the resilience approach, which we are advocating for disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation. And this resilience approach looks at heritage not only as something which is vulnerable to all these hazards, but is also has solutions through traditional knowledge and experience over time. And communities are not only the victims, but they are also a very important asset for managing disaster risks. And also equally important are ecosystem and based services and ecological services, nature-based solutions, which provide us a lot of thought to link nature with culture and use it for disaster risk reduction. So this is the approach for also reviewing and updating the resource manual on managing disaster risks, which is basing on itself on exactly these parameters. And also we are including biohazards, learning from this experience of pandemic. And at this moment, ICCROM is actually conducting a training program, which is for heritage managers, which is titled Understanding People, Nature and Culture, Heritage Management for Building Resilience of Living Traditional Settlements. And we want to really develop tools and methodologies which can help site managers to bring this thinking into their day-to-day practice. Because if that doesn't happen, probably this will all remain as theoretical tools or theories and which we may admire and appreciate, but will not be able to put on ground in terms of actions. So thank you very much. This is where I would like to end my presentation.